Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan, the author and writer of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. This is my memoir. And I'm going to close section 4 of the book today by reading chapter 15, the last chapter in this section. The title of the chapter is One Breath at a Time, begins on page 291 of my memoir. In late July, in the northern mountains of British Columbia, I was completing an 11-day Vipassana retreat. I'd not heard of noble silence before, but it meant no talking and no looking at other participants, no eye-to-eye contact, reading, writing, or communication for the entire 11 days. I remember these words by the Master: start again with a calm and quiet mind. Each time a session of meditation ended. These sessions started at 4:30 a.m. and ended at 10:30 p.m. My ego would come to hate those words. My ego would come to hate the Master who uttered them. As the 11 days unfolded, as I sat, I concocted the most appalling, now comical excuses to make any good my escape from the retreat. I created scenes of accidents and mayhem, grave illnesses, and even death. Anything to assist my exit. My ego was in full flight. But to have to start again? Arrgh. The 11 days passed, slowly, with raw, horrid images and confusing mind games. I purposely threw up walls for my psyche. When did it dawn on me that I was behaving like a caged animal? I must have reached that conclusion. I was driving myself mad, circling my mind, scratching the walls. No one had forced me to be there. I had chosen this. Hell, I paid for it. So I took a deep breath and started again. What I braved. I'd come to a crossroads in my professional life, and I felt it was time for me to leave my successful consulting business behind. I had created some amazing firsts for my community and myself, yet it was time to leave. I still marvel at the volume of discomfort that many of my friends had with the notion of me walking away from a six-figure salary with no sense of what was next. Although at times I proclaimed being okay with not knowing, there were other times that letting go of my perceived security was rather daunting. In early 1994, while living on the island of Maui, I learned Vipassana meditation. It was said to be the meditation used by the Buddha. Its simple form, using breath as your focus, yet enormously challenging because you were invited not to move during the time you were sitting. In her book, Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth Gilbert describes Vipassana meditation as the most brutal form of meditation. The words meditation and brutal seem strange bedfellows. While contemplating my exit from the consulting business, two ideas came to mind. The first was to sit on the island of Maui for a month to recharge, and the second was to do an 11-day silent retreat. When I returned, I noticed tremendous fear at the thought of 11 days of silence. I ended up doing both. Perhaps my next step in life awaited me on Little Beach in Maui, or in the pine-scented mountains of Merritt, British Columbia. I felt like I was playing all the characters from the movie Ghostbusters. The difference was that I wasn't really chasing anything. I would come to learn something was actually chasing me. Maui's gift was divine rest. This sacred place nurtures my soul and always delivers life-altering experiences. This time it opened my heart to the power of feeling, and I'd come back home with a clearer sense of what feelings were vital for my heart to grow and heal. Mustering as much courage as I could, my next stop was the Vipassana Center in Merritt, British Columbia. Myself and 51 other people were about to take an inner journey that scared the shit out of me. It was appalling and quite comical, the volume of excuses I conjured up to make sure I didn't sit for the meditation retreat. The clean, crisp mountain air was generously laden with pine. I'd never been surrounded by such an immense forest, and perhaps it was good because it might serve to absorb the screams I expected would come out of me for the next few long days. I'm always intrigued by my ego's desire to trick me into thinking I've got it all figured out. My ego and I can be so arrogant. The next 11 days were said to be the biggest battle of my life. What I noticed presently was this voice that said, "It's okay not to know." From the moment I sat down to meditate, literally the very moment, my mind began to hatch a scheme for me to escape from this retreat. I can't even remember the number of schemes, but they were all conjured up so that I could bolt from this spiritually based prison. At the time, laughter was not an option. Instead, I felt immense sadness and gut-wrenching pain. Of course, I had every man in the place as gay. It was another plot by my ego to focus on anything else other than the rising and the falling of my breath. To say it was hell, albeit a noble hell, would be putting it mildly. Day one felt like an eternity. After our first and only 2 meal breaks, we were allowed to walk around a designated area. Like my attempt to rope off my mind, they roped off a small area to meander through. I invented a game that allowed me 1 full circle around a grove of trees per successful day of meditation. The definition of success was not leaving. 11 days of silence taught me myriad lessons. The most significant lesson, which dawned on me at 4 a.m. to the sound of a Tibetan chime, was that I didn't need to know anything on that day. My work was to notice my breath, be present, acknowledge a thought, let it go, and come back to breathing. What I braved as I made my 11th circle on the 11th day was an awakening to having spent my entire life circling around a story that my ego created. It was a desperate lie that not knowing was the worst place for me to be. And then I started again with a calm and quiet mind. The unlearning. It took a long time to extend compassion to my family of origin. I can see now I had to be able to extend it to myself first. There was a time on my journey to what was supposed to be a professional football career, when it didn't seem possible for anyone in my family to authentically encourage me. It confused my younger self. No one ever said, "Go ahead and discover what lights up your heart." No one shared any wisdom that would help me understand that I'd know the truth about myself because I would know its demand. With compassion, as I viewed the lives of many of my siblings and both of my parents, who have all taken their last breaths, they too were not encouraged to find out what would light up their hearts. There were moments when I might have indicated a desire to head off in a direction that excited me, but all too often there was little encouragement. My family effectively indoctrinated me into this collective belief. I did so to ensure I believed the same as the rest of them. This reality, what is and is not possible for the members of the group, had been agreed upon and maintained long before I showed up. It's what the Dolan family did, or so Mom said. I guess there were benefits, but I never really felt like it was a conscious agreement. And whatever it was, there certainly wasn't room for what was going on to light up my heart. I was born into it. With ignorance as my guide, I must have, at a certain stage, begun to challenge my family mentally. A code of independence was not the way of my family. Progress was not encouraged. Thou shalt not be independent. There existed a silence that stifled any degree of creativity I might have talked about. When my interests were different from sports, the things I used to support those interests, like my candle making equipment I bought, my 35mm camera I wanted to learn about photography with, or my white hockey skates, all of them disappeared. Literally, they disappeared. For the longest time, I thought they had vanished because those interests were too gay for my family to contemplate me being associated with. Either way, I never found out what happened to any of my things. If I was to grow, I had to learn how to, regardless of family belief, honor and respect myself. God, that felt hard. I had invented my life force I actually had invested my life force into maintaining my affiliation with my family. This involved me making an implicit agreement to think like them, to evaluate situations the way my family did, and to believe in right and wrong according to family values, ambitions, or lack of ambitions. As long as I allowed my family tribal thinking to remain unexamined, I was unwittingly saying I would follow the family laws It was painful. My attendance at a different high school and eventual graduation, my attendance at university, my marriage, my coming out, my gay relationships, my move to Vancouver, and my business success were not celebrated by my family. It caused me deep pain, but I didn't know the pain they felt because it was, to them, me leaving them. If only I knew compassion. When I started that day, that new day, free from my family constraints, I began to give myself the knowledge of what I wanted and found the courage to take steps towards it. Today, my only sister, along with my extended family of nieces and nephews, and now their children, celebrate me. I, in turn, now celebrate all the joys I know they want to create for themselves. The idea of Dolan family think has died. Its time has ended. The unlearning for me was to notice that if, for some reason or excuse, I do not step towards what lights up my heart, I need to remember I am enough, I am lovable, and then create another moment on another day to step towards that which lights up my heart. This was a hard story to write. And in kind of conjuring up what the ideas would be, I was kind of messing around with this notion of how could I free myself to learn the things in life that I think life had to offer. And of course, I could see how literally none of my siblings were able to free themselves. Right from the dysfunction of the family, our enabling mom, our alcoholic father, and sadly for the addiction that would land with all my siblings, whether that was alcohol or drugs or a mix of other things. So when I began to wonder how I could pen this story relating to discovering how to set myself free and be able to create a space for me to grow into that wasn't connected to the way of being with my family, right? This unwritten rule book, this is how you shall be a Dolan, was daunting. It was really daunting. First of all, I wasn't supposed to do that. And second of all, I realized while I was doing it, not while I was coming up with the story, while I was doing it, I was terrified because, of course, in two circumstances, when I announced that my wife and I were getting married, there wasn't a big celebration for my family. And I would eventually understand that they felt this sadness. Some of them were pissed off because I was leaving, right, the family. And of course, that would be the reason why I got married. And then when I left the relationship with my wife, I would come to realize that even my coming out, which was another level of leaving my family, wasn't embraced with love by my family. Sure, there were a few that kind of, I got a sense, loved me and at that time loved my partner, but when I eventually got past all of that and began to do my work, I realized that what was still there was a sadness and an anger that Thomas was going to leave. Tom at the time was going to leave. The anger was perhaps for my other siblings that they didn't know how to choose to leave. And I remember feeling anger from some of my siblings as I exited for the 3 years and then moved to Vancouver because I didn't want to choose to stay in Calgary with all the wackiness that was going on. I felt one sister in particular was really angry because I wasn't there to deal with all the crap, as she called it. So being celebrated for who I wanted to be, finding a way to celebrate who I wanted to be, was daunting, was really hard. So I'm proud to have worked my way through what was theirs and what was mine. And borrowing from the indigenous culture, right? Mom always called her kids a tribe, which I wouldn't use as a description today. That would be cultural thievery. But this group of folks who were melded and mended around a way of thinking, a way of being that had nothing to do with growing or loving or forgiving. It was all about survival. it made sense because I wanted to be the opposite of all of that. And it didn't mean that I was better because I wanted that. But I realize now it was really difficult for my family to hold that because that wasn't their aspiration. So my job was to lean into what inspired me and what I aspired to in relation to wanting to live from a place that was different than where it is my family was living from. So that made it really, really difficult. Perhaps you can relate, particularly with our families of blood, where there's something that you want to do, and it's your essential self or your intuitive self, and instead you make a choice to listen to the cultural part of you. What will my family think? What will my religion say? What will my group of friends say? To be led by our hearts is the most divine bit of love that we can give ourselves. And I think that's really what this chapter is about, me finding what it is I wanted to be led by in my life. And I'm so blessed to have found that it is by my heart.